Welcome to the Hidden Truth Show podcast. We're going to provide for you an interview that we did with Stanton Peele, who is an expert on addiction and not a fan of the 12-step program. He is the author of Resisting 12-Step Coercion, How to Fight Forced Participation in AA, NA, or 12-Step Treatment. This is the middle of a deep dive called AA Kills, where it's our belief that AA is letting down far more people than it's helping, and that America's addiction to AA needs to come to an end. Check out this interview with Stanton Peele.
I'm going to say some radical things. I hope you can handle it, because I haven't said anything radical yet. Nothing is or is not addictive. Nothing is addictive. Opiates aren't addictive. You know, I'll tell you about an exercise I do. I'll give your fans a treat. You can see me at Rutgers. I just was on the same stage as the Portuguese drug czar. And here's my opening gambit. I say, how many people in this room have had a painkiller? And everybody raises their hand. And then I say, did you become addicted? How many people became addicted to the painkiller? Raise your hand. So 100 people, let's say, in that audience raised their hand. They've had an opioid painkiller. 0 became addicted to it. And I say, explain that to me. Aren't opioids the epitome of addiction? Aren't we hearing constantly that they rope people in? A man like Sam Quinones writes Dreamland, and he devotes a whole chapter to how the opioid molecule captures you so you can't escape. And yet 0% of the people in that room become addicted. Are opioids addictive?
Well, it's something that people are capable of becoming addicted to.
Exactly. Right? That definition applies to everything that we could discuss. We, for 100 and more years, have decided that opioids, heroin being the most, but morphine, whatever, are a source of addiction. They have some kind of secret chemical message. That's not true. One's never been found. One will never be found. Of course, DSM doesn't label any drug addictive, but people now are capable of saying marijuana is addictive, cocaine is addictive, and they're very different chemical experiences. As we've said, they call gambling addictive. So obviously, it's not the chemical structure per se that's the source of addiction. Addiction takes place at the level of a human experience and how a person relates to a particular involvement. And so we are and have been thinking wrongly about addiction for maybe 100 or 150 years, but only 100 or 150 years. In the 19th century, people didn't think of opioids as addictive. They didn't say, oh, opioids, in that case, morphine and opium, they didn't say, oh, their addiction, they cause addiction and nothing else causes addiction. We invented that around the turn of the 20th century. Now everybody believes it. They can't dissuade themselves from that feeling or that belief, and it's completely wrong-headed, and it's killing. Do you want me to give you an example of how it's killing?
Please.
You're aware, everybody's heard this, 72,000 people died of drug-related causes last year. Most people mistake that as being opioid overdoses. They died of drugs. And the single policy that we've most tried to do that, to prevent that, is to reduce prescriptions. However, drug-related deaths have increased for each of the last 5 years and hit a record height in 2017 for painkillers, heroin, methamphetamines, cocaine, and benzodiazepines. During those same 5 years, since 2012, 2013, prescriptions for opioids have declined precipitously. Now, do you see what's happening and why it's happening? Because we mistakenly attach addiction to drugs. We say, well, opiates cause drug addiction, and that's why people die. Let's not give people opioids. Let's give them fewer opioids, and more people die. Why do you think that's happening, by the way? That's pretty critical thing to know, isn't it?
More people dying despite fewer prescriptions.
Yes.
They're turning to heroin.
And they're almost like this. Deaths going up like that, prescriptions going down like that. They're in reverse order.
Because they're turning to street drugs like heroin.
Well, they're dying of prescription painkillers too. You know you can get them on the street too. You know.
Yeah.
So
anyway, that was my guess at the answer. You're
in the ballpark.
Okay.
When you're not, people don't die taking painkillers by prescription. People don't die in a hospital. They give you pretty powerful painkillers in a hospital, and then they send you home with a prescription. People don't die. A microscopic number of people say, "Hey, I want to keep doing this." 99. Well, you took painkillers. Why did you stop taking painkillers?
I'm sorry?
You told me, you raised your hand and said you took painkillers.
Oh, Why did I stop?
You stop?
Because the pain because I no longer needed them for the pain.
Voila. And if you had any temptation to take them, you would say, well, I'm not going to go start taking painkillers on the street. I'm not going to start buying prescriptions. And you would say, I've got a few things to do. I've got this show to do. You're connected to life. So the answer isn't that you took an opioid or didn't take an opioid. And that would even hold true if you took the opioid for a month or two because you had back pain. You still wouldn't become addicted. It's a person who becomes addicted to a substance. It's not a substance that causes addiction, which is where you were headed. And when people are seeking painkillers, either because they're addicted or because they're in pain and they can't get them, they'll hit the streets for not only heroin, but painkillers. And also remember, I told you meth, cocaine, and benzodiazepine deaths are going up also, which are in the 100, people take tranquilizers sometimes for pain. Everything's going up. So that the fact that they're seeking alternatives is partly the answer. But here's the other answer. If you're skeptical about what I've said so far, you're going to, cut off the interview and say I'm crazy now. We have become convinced that we can't control drugs. That makes us more susceptible to addiction. If you have a child and he has a weakness, let's say he bites his nails, some little problem, you don't say, Johnny, let me explain something to you. You're addicted to biting your nails. You're never going to stop biting your nails. That's just the way you're genetically wired. You can't help it. Possibly the only thing we can do is have you wear a catcher's mitt all the time. Now, anybody would do that, what would you say about them as a parent? But that's basically how we approach alcohol and drugs. And often for people the same age. We'll tell a 16-year-old or a 17-year-old who may be doing things we judge not to be, well behaved or possibly dangerous. And we say, oh, for God's sake, you've got to go to AA. You've got a lifetime disease. We've already gone into your drug taking, your painkiller behavior. We're not going to go into your entire history. But many people that you and I might know drank in pretty random and bad ways when they were 16, 18, 22, and 24. And 90% of them don't drink that way now. They got married, they got a job, drinking ceased to be the fun thing that it was. And we're in the process. I'm writing a book, by the way. Now, by the way, I have something called the Life Process Program, which works with people who have problems, and it's a non-disease-based program. And I'm writing a book with a man who's a developmental specialist named Zach Rhodes called Outgrowing Addiction with Common Sense Rather Than Disease Therapy. And what we express is that addiction can be a normal developmental process. There are periods that people go through, like when soldiers were in Vietnam, for example, where addiction is a common, sometimes you might even say normal response, certain kinds of college and young adult drinking, but that the normal developmental process takes us away from that. And that way of thinking about addiction helps us to deal with addiction in these ways. It makes us realize that we're not powerless and totally captive to them. It makes our approach to the thing not to be to say, well, never drink. You know, if you tell a 16-year-old, here's my plan for you, never drink again, that's a bad plan. Or if you drink, you're going to go crazy and kill yourself. That's not a real plan. It allows us to navigate with people through their lives to help them be more aware, to help encourage maturity and responsibility, to protect them, perhaps when they're being at a more foolhardy point, to allow them to get to a point where they're going to be more sensible and less likely to destroy themselves. That's a whole different way of thinking about addiction and approaching it. And so my joke, in quotes, how much longer will we try and reduce painkiller prescriptions while deaths from drugs go up before we decide, you know, maybe we need a different approach here. Maybe we should just give people pain pills, you know, when they're in pain. Conceivably, we might even give them pills when they're addicted and say, you know, we'd like you to talk to a therapist. This isn't a healthy way of being, but you're not going to die from receiving prescription painkillers. You're going to die from mixing 5 or 6 kinds of medications. That's how people die. And the goal is to keep that. That's called harm reduction. The goal is to support them in treatment, perhaps, to allow them to reach a point where they'll be able to live their lives independent of an addiction. But banning drugs or instructing people that they're lifelong addicts or telling them, listen, buddy, if you ever touch this drug again, you're doomed. Now, I know you used to be a heroin addict and now, you went to the hospital and they removed your appendix. Sorry, we're not going to give you anesthetic, which, by the way, no human being in the world would do. Even the worst disease advocate who says, I can never touch a painkiller again, when they say, we're going to remove your appendix, he says, why don't you give me some painkillers for the time being, and let me see if I can deal with that. What do you think? You think I'm making any sense, or am I going right down the tubes, do you think?
No, I think it's an interesting approach. Basically, if I'm understanding you, you're saying you don't like the idea of labeling things addictive or non-addictive.
Yes. Good.
We want to look at the individual and the underlying issues with that individual that's causing an addiction.
Things have the possibility of being more or less addictive depending upon how powerfully and directly they alter your experience.
Yes, and I was going to make that point, that I presume that if a painkiller came out that was less addictive, if I can use that word, I know you don't like to use that, but that people were less inclined to become addicted to, you would support using that painkiller over.
There's no such thing. There's not pain relief in and of itself is potentially addictive.
If there was a hypothetical pill that was less addictive, you would say, yes, let's.
There's no painkiller in pharmacology, there used to be the search for the non-addictive painkiller has been going on for over 100 years.
Well, how about Advil, for instance? Advil does not.
Well, Advil's a mild painkiller. Some drugs are more overwhelmingly deadening to your experience. I mean, fentanyl and heroin, but you get things in the hospital that are more powerful than street heroin.
Anyway, we're in agreement that some things can have more addictive qualities than others, and perhaps
the way they have more addictive qualities is because they more directly and predictably alter your experience so that you can rely on them for that purpose.
So let's go to the individual.
But that still doesn't explain addiction. Sex more readily powerfully modifies people's experience when they're in their 20s and 30s than any drug.
If you enjoyed that segment of the interview, go check out the Hidden Truth Show podcast. That's the Hidden Truth Show podcast. We're currently in our deep dive called AA Kills. You can listen to it wherever you get your podcasts.